Okay, welcome guys for week, what is it, week three already of our webinar series, so our autumn webinar series. Actually, we've gone live out to YouTube and Facebook, so hopefully the stream all works and all our technical comes together. We've got 2 pieces of software that we're using, so all good. For you guys that were on last week, apologies if you clicked through to our previous webinar software. It was still sending out stuff even though we deleted it, but we should be back on track now. So welcome. If it's first time to join us, fantastic and great to have you on board. Today, so unlimited cash or almighty crash. So basically we're going to look at probably, today's going to be heavy on the economics, but what I want to do is keep it really, really simple so that everybody can understand it, okay? And look, I studied economics at school and at university, and I've kept up to date with it because obviously it does apply and does, more and more so as a property investor, and certainly as you build a larger and larger portfolio, you need to be mindful of these things, okay? In fact, most of the questions I'm getting right now is based on economics, okay? So we're gonna go through some of that, but don't be afraid of it. Actually, it's pretty cool economics. And we're gonna have a look at whether all this money they're dumping into the economy, which is about, they've increased this money supply by about 40% on what it was pre-COVID, which is uncharted territory. That's never happened before. It's an amazing time to be living. And yeah, as I say, it could be unlimited cash or it could be an almighty crash. And hopefully we'll get a better understanding of what the potential is. Are we going to be able to answer that question today with a definitive answer and a certain answer and a guarantee? Probably not, because there's a lot of things that can happen to it. But anyway, so let's get started. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Ritesh. Ritesh runs our London office. He's Director of New Homes at the Easy Track Property Group. So basically, Ritesh, why don't we give you a quick summary for everyone about your day-to-day role and what you do? Awesome. Okay, and we've also got Ryan Ranavard. So Ryan is an associate director. He runs our, if you like, our high net worth guys. It's gladfish.cc, which is basically high net worth, alternative investments, our development side, and that. So do you want to just introduce yourself? Give us a bit of a CV. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's certainly fun and games. I mean, but the amazing thing I find with this whole environment right now is that if you go back sort of 10 years ago, or last recession 12 years ago, it was groundbreaking then. It was, this has never happened before. This is, we've never seen this. We'll never see it again. And sure enough, if you go back to the previous recession, it was the same thing. Oh, I can't hear on YouTube. Why is that can't hear? Sorry guys, it's just saying, the guys are coming through saying they can't hear on YouTube. Let me just work out what's going wrong there. Yeah, okay. The joys of technology, hey? You can only hear me. Can you, okay. Can't hear me. Let me think what I need to do. Why is that? Wait there, let me try this. Sorry guys. Yeah, webinar's fine. Maybe it's because microphone, no, that should be fine. I don't know guys. There's no one there, yeah. Can't hear Brett, but not the others. Can hear Brett, can hear, but not the others. Okay, I know why. Good fun. Guys, we're gonna have to, yeah, we won't be able to fix the YouTube stream, I think, unless we get, let me think. Yeah. No, I think what we'll do is we'll move on. We won't be able to do the YouTube, guys. Unfortunately, you'll be able to hear me, but you won't be able to hear the guys. So certainly, actually, we'll leave the YouTube on for the first half, but then you won't be able to get the Q&A and that sort of stuff for the second half. So we'll probably end the that side of it. All right. Yeah. So, but if you sign it, guys, if you're on here watching, sign up. If you go to gladfish.com/webinar, sign up straight away, and you should be able to get the link and come onto the actual webinar. Okay. So if you do that, if not, then maybe just put, or in fact, yeah, if you signed up, then we'll send it round. Otherwise, yeah, we can't really. I know what the problem is now. Since we've changed over, we can't do both streams at once, which is unfortunate. But yeah, anyway, so we're going to get on. I've got a fair bit of talking to do anyway at the start, which is the main economics of it, and then we'll move on to the main thing. But yeah, so all right. Apologies to the YouTube and Facebookers. But yeah, so guys, today what we're going to be doing, obviously, economics. Okay, the one thing about economics is that nobody actually ever gets it correct. All right, most people and most economists, they work on they work through models and they work through basic principles and theories. Okay, the problem is there's so many inputs into these theories that actually nobody really knows what the exact outcome will be. What they can do is they can predict where the trends are going to go and they can predict where things are going to go. So the interesting thing is, and if we have a look at, traditionally what we talk about is two things. We talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy, okay? Now, why monetary policy is off the table, all right? Quite simply because in fact, really never before have we had such low interest rates for so long, all right? Now, the monetary policy is generally the raising and lower of interest rates. By raising interest rate, it takes the money supply, decreases the money supply. By decreasing interest rates, it increases the money supply, so it stimulates the economy. Obviously, we've got to zero. We're now talking about going to minus figures, okay, which potentially could happen. Fiscal policy is a little bit different. So normally what happens, how a country makes its money is by taxation, and that taxation then allows them to spend. But what the government also do, and what most governments around the world do now, is they use their central banks to borrow money from, okay? Now, for the most part, because they're a sovereign nation, people trust that, and effectively they give them low rates over a long period of time. So they've got a long time to pay it off, all right? So right now, the problem with monetary policy is interest rates can't go any lower. They have to go into the negative then, all right? Which means they're going to penalize people to save cash, all right? Now, historically, that hasn't worked. It hasn't stimulated. It hasn't really resulted in what they wanted. But they're still going to give it another try. You know, Japan's the last case, but there's lots of cases that have tried to go negative on their interest rates. All right. If we have a look at the interest rates, this is the Federal Reserve. So this is the US figures. So we can see, you know, that's from 1970 to 2020. Now, interestingly, okay, if we have a look at this, what we're going to see is that we've had 9 recessions since the 1970. So in 50 years, we've had 9 recessions, all right? Now, most people would say that property doubles every 7 to 10 years, that we have a recession every 10 years, a short-term recession every 10 years, and a larger, you know, long-term recession or larger recession, you know, perhaps every 70 or 80 years, you know. But the reality is we actually have now, and if you look, the amount of years that we have them, you know, it's 12 years since the last recession. So the question is, are we getting better at avoiding recessions, or is there something else at play? You know, so, and who knows, all right? So let's just go over some terms now. So we've got this thing called deflation, all right? So deflation is simply the lowering of prices, yeah? Decreasing prices. Inflation is the opposite. It's increasing. There is no in between. It's basically deflation or inflation, yeah, where the prices are going up or down. Now the question is, how do you rate that? Okay. So guys, look, bottom line with that is 2% is what most developed countries look to shoot for. You look at somewhere like China, they're talking 5 to 7%. If you look at maybe some of your other countries, your African countries and that, they may even be going higher. South American, you're expecting some of those could be in the 20%, So it just depends. But for a developed country, you're sort of talking 2%. Now, one of the big fears is this thing called stagflation, where we have inflation in prices, increasing unemployment, decreasing GDP, and decreasing demand, which basically means that you're screwed, all right? And it's not screwed permanently, but it's very hard to get out of because it's almost like whatever you do, you're stuffed, okay? So stagflation's to be massively avoided, all right? So how do we actually describe this and how do we get into these things and how does this, the simple layman's terms of how to actually think about this? So here's how I look at it, all right? So this is basically what I call stimulus explained, all right? Now, if we just talk about the money supply, okay? And forget about everything else, forget about interest rates, forget about all that sort of stuff, just think about money supply right now. So if we all of a sudden put our foot on the brake, yeah, in other words, we stop the money supply, slow the money supply down. Now we can do that through raising interest rates, we can do it through taxation, a number of different ways. But effectively, if you put the brakes on, what happens to the car? It goes nowhere, yeah? And in fact, what happens in economics, prices will begin to go down because there's lesser demand than supply, things will go down. But the other side of it is, if you take your foot off the brake now, and then you put your foot on the accelerator, but you put it straight down to the floor, what happens is you're going to stall the car or it's going to take off really quickly, yeah, which you don't want. Inflation will be huge, and therefore the rise in prices, and that's not good for an economy. Stagflation is where you ride the clutch, where you've got this, you're pulling the clutch out, but you're actually putting the thing in, and you're actually not going anywhere, all right? And then the worst is the depression. The depression realistically is, depression is pretty simply, different people call it different things, but it's pretty much a 3-year recession with a GDP drop of at least 10%, okay? So that's kind of what we're looking at, with that. So, interestingly, we're printing lots of money. As I said, 40% increase in that. And if we have a look at the money supply, and we talk briefly about the money supply. So money supply is categorized into different ways. And look, just forget about the details of this, but just think of it like this way. M0 is simply cash that's in circulation. It's the money you've got in your wallet. It's the money you've got sitting, in your back closet or whatever, or underneath your bed or that sort of stuff. It's readily available cash. Yeah. MB we don't really use because basically that's cash plus money that's in the banks, liquidity in the banks, but really that's not in circulation. So we don't really use that. M1 is where cash plus checkings and savings and that sort of stuff you've got. M2 is M1 plus savings and plus certificates of deposits. Don't worry about that. M3 is where you've got larger institution deposits. So as you go up from M0 to M3, the cash gets bigger, all right? It doesn't matter which one you use, but if we have a look here, this is what money supply has done, okay, just since coronavirus. So if we look, this is 1960 through to 2020, all right? Now this is the US Fed money stock M1, okay? So basically that's the readily available cash, all right? If we have a look, since 1960, it's been slowly increasing, which actually is what most economists will say. That's good, the supply of money is increasing over time. And then watch what happened in 2020 coronavirus. It's a massive jump. It went from about 4 trillion to 5.5 trillion, which is a 40% increase. Yeah, in other words, that's cash that's just been dumped into the system. Yeah, and that's printed into existence. That's the beauty of a fiat currency. Prior to that, we had the gold standard, which the gold standard meant that you had to have the money you produced, the currency you produced, had to be backed by actual gold. Okay, so that's a pretty dramatic increase, and as far as the charts go back, that's never happened before. In such a dramatic fashion. All right, So the interesting thing is, what does that mean for us? Okay, and I think this is what we've got to look at, because if we look at traditional economists, what they would say is, this amount of cash in the economy is going to lead to massive inflation, because you've put so much in, but unless the economy expands massively, that there's too much cash, and too much cash means that effectively there's lots and lots of supply, not enough demand. Sorry, other way around, lots of demand because people have cash, and lots of supply, therefore prices go up. That's not good, okay, when they go up too fast, yeah? So how do they rein it in? They rein it in through inflation. Inflation, too much, not good. So the traditional economists would say that's not a good situation. And in fact, a lot of economists now coming out saying we have to go and crash. We have to correct the wrongs effectively of this. The other side, and this is where there's not just one theory of economists. There's a number. So if we talk about monetarism, can it provide the answers? Well, look, it's a school of economic thought that basically says that in order to have a growing economy over time, which is what we need, you have to control the supply of money. And if you slowly increase the supply of money, then the economy will grow, And for the most part, that has been true. And, personally, I'm a great believer in this school of thought, okay? But I also think that you can go over the top. And, the question is, have we gone over the top? And that really is the question, I guess, now is, have we gone too far with, 40% increase is a massive, massive increase, yeah? And that's really, I guess, the question that we need to answer today is that too much, Look, interestingly, and one of the questions that I had earlier on today, or yesterday it was, sorry, was, well, this is, it's going to cause a depression, the massive depression. But let me explain why I don't think we're in for another depression like the Great Depression, okay? The Great Depression, if you looked at it and you looked at all the facts and figures and the lead up to it and all the things, it looked very similar, if not the same as what we're seeing now and what we saw in 2008. The difference was in 1929, the Fed was defending the gold standard, and therefore they kept raising interest rates, which caused massive deflation, and it wrecked the system. And that took, years, and in fact, probably a decade in most cases, to actually recover from that. Yeah. So that was what happened back then. The distinction now is this. Yeah. That what we've done is the opposite. We've injected massive amount of money to promote spending, which has created the opposite thing. So basically what's happened is it's not a case of, what happened there is what happened there. The reaction was totally different, the opposite of it. And actually, I think that has been a much better, and I've been very complimentary to the government for doing this. And not just the UK government, but a lot of governments around the world have done exactly this and are getting exactly the same results. Now, we might say, well, hold on, we're in for a massive sting in the tail, I'm going to kick in the arse later on, and we may well do that. They may well have spent too much money, borrowed too much money. However, let's talk about debt, okay? Because it's one thing to sit here and say, well, hold on, they're borrowing, GDP has gone up, debt to GDP has gone over 100% and this and that, which sounds terrible, okay? And for you and I, that is terrible, yeah? Because if, our entire income for a year is this much, that much, and our debt goes from here to there, see, and this is the thing I'll point out, all right? If we have a look at debt to GDP, okay? So you can see this is the United States and Britain. I don't know why they didn't do UK, but at the end of the day, Britain is by far the biggest. So, no disrespect to Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, but the bottom line is the forecast. And if you have a look at those things in 2000, since 2000 to 2020, you'll see we're at about 80% in 2016, 88, 87%, I think. We've just crossed over, and I think I've got a slide here, where the UK in June of this year crossed over the 100% barrier. In other words, our debt to our GDP was the same, yeah? And obviously that was in June, so we've had July, August, September, October, November, coming to November. So we've had 5 months of serious borrowing since then, all right? So, Sorry guys, I don't know what that thing's there. But anyway, let's have a look at debt around the world. So if we have a look at the debt around the world, Japan 237%, Italy 135%, United States 106%. This is in 2018. All right, UK 2018. Sorry, it was not 2016. 86.8%. Yeah. So obviously that's gone from 86 to 100. Now, if you think about it, last recession we decided to do austerity, and we kept austerity to just before the election. Yeah. So interesting. If we have a look at debt around the world and debt as a percentage of GDP, yeah. So there's about 70 trillion worth of debt around the world. 31% of that is the United States. Then you got Japan, then China, and the UK is right down the bottom there at 3.5%. Yeah. Now for the 5th or 6th largest nation in the world, that's, it's not ideal, but it's also not, not going to kill us, if you like. It potentially could if it got too high. All right. Now, here's the interesting thing. So many people talk about debt to GDP as being the be all and end all, but actually it's not. Because if we think about it, you've got to consider debt versus debt repayments over time, yeah? Or over the term of the thing. Because what happens is, debt is the overall value. So we can say we owe, GDP is 20 billion and our debt is 20 billion. It's 100%, yeah? But the reality is, if that 100% is due in a year's time, and that 100% is at 7% borrowing, yeah, or interest rate, that becomes an issue. But imagine if that was at 0.1% or 0.2% over 20 or 30 years, okay, now that's a lot more affordable. So you've got to take, you've got to look at the right metrics. And actually, it's not necessarily about the level of debt, that is a consideration, but it's actually a lot more about the term of the debt, how long it's over. It's also the interest rate, and it is the level of debt. So there's different things. And I think you've got to account for all those. And when you account for all those, you start to build a slightly different picture than what the media may be giving you. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that adding 40% of the money supply isn't going to have a kick in the tail. It may well do. We don't know that yet. But the interesting thing is, and one of the issues is that obviously GDP drops, yeah, which means tax revenue drops, which means, the income of the country drops, which means that debt, rises considerably above potentially what you're earning. So there's also that. We've had the borrowing and the income drop. Interestingly, if we look at China, okay, China has gone and they had a big drop, for them a massive drop because they've been growing at sort of, 7, that sort of 8, 9, 10%, that sort of thing. And then they've dropped into the negative, but they've gone straight back up to where they're 5% growth this year, 4.9 in Q3, which actually isn't all that bad. Yeah. So can we do that? Because we're seeing exactly the same thing here as Australia and Singapore and China, where they've actually been able to bounce back. Okay. And I think that's really interesting that these things happening, So guys, it's an interesting thing, but look, is 40%, this 40% are really concerned? The question is, over what period is it? And if we have a look at it, the interesting thing that I find, all right, let me just go there. Yeah, so the interesting thing I find with this is actually, when you have a look at it, a lot of the debt that's coming due now that needs to be refinanced is going to be refinanced at such a low interest rate that governments can afford to borrow more now because the rate is so low. If the rate was at 7% and they're having a remortgage at 7%, that's a serious consideration. But now if you're borrowing at 0.1%, or even negative it could get down to, which government bonds have gone down in negative, some of them. So, and you're borrowing over 5 or 10 years, it's not so much of a concern. And that's why there's a lot of people now, economists and that sort of stuff, saying, actually, do you know what? This is manageable. This is not a case of where we are definitely going to be screwed and we're going to, fall over and all that sort of stuff. So in some ways, it's not as bad as it's being made out in the media by a lot of things. And look, I'm on YouTube, okay? And we're playing with the YouTube algorithms now, and I'm putting videos out and I'm starting to work out what day I should put them in and all this sort of stuff. And I go on there And I have to shake my head because I look at, my contemporaries and, my peers and all that sort of stuff. And some of the stuff they're saying about how, we're in for an almighty crash and it's going to happen and we're predicting it. And 20%, 40% and the share market's going to drop and all this doomsaying. And the problem is some of these guys I know, some of these guys I chat with. And when I chat with them, they know that that's not necessarily going to be as bad. But you know what? Their YouTube rankings perform a hell of a lot better if you put a negative keyword. And the interesting thing is, and so I was chatting to the marketing team today, and we're saying, you know what, let's run for the next 2 weeks, not this week, next week, 2 weeks, let's put really like negative, crash, housing crash 2021, or why the housing market will crash and that sort of stuff. Because that gets a lot more, and I'm talking in the region of tenfold more hits than just putting my house price predictions for 2021, or, it's not as bad as we might think for 2021, And unfortunately, that's the thing we live in right now. So things aren't as bad. The other side is, even though we've increased this, the money supply, one of the other side of the things is that actually that's not that bad, all right? And the reason I say that is because we've got a lot of other things going on right now, okay? And one of those things is the fact that we have got what we call technology, And interestingly, technology is inherently deflationary, okay? If you look at AI, deep learning, automation, all these things, they're changing so quickly that it means that actually that they're deflationary in nature. So what was the state of the art this year, next year is, out, yeah? And that causes deflation, price deflation. And that, that's an interesting phenomenon because this is now starting to really pick up, yeah, and starting to have an impact as more and more platforms are built, as more and more, these sort of things happen. And the interesting thing here is where we're heading towards, I think, and it's not just me, this is, a lot of other people's opinions in the books that I'm reading, is that we're going to end up with two types of businesses. We're going to end up with the Uber type platforms. They own nothing, they're just a platform. And they're very fast growth, they like this, yeah? Then you've got the other businesses, which are the providers. They're the people that own the assets, that have, the General Motors that, manufacture motoring cars and have to have massive scale of, things. They're very slow growth, but obviously we need both of them, okay? But this is the sort of thing that we're talking about now. When you have this sort of split and this disruption and all these sort of things happening, where does that leave us? And this is where a lot of the rules that you were written in the sort of 60s and 70s and even before in the 50s in economics, not that the rules are being rewritten, but they're being reapplied. And we're starting to now get to finesse them a lot better. So my thing is, I actually am not sure that it's going to be such a bad thing. So guys, I want to open it up to the boys too, to Ritesh and Ryan now. YouTube guys, you're not going to be able to hear them, which is a real problem. So what I suggest, if you haven't already got on, I'm just thinking there, I'll come back to Milo. I'll come back to your question a little bit later. But yeah, if in fact what I'll do, I'll come back to your question. I'll make sure I look you up and send you the answer to that question. But yeah, basically, look, I think with this whole game, we don't have to worry that much. I don't think that we're going to get into this massive sting in the tail, massive inflation. Interest rates aren't predicted to go up for at least a decade, massively. So certainly the markets aren't predicting that yet. So even though we've seen a massive injection of cash, what we've actually seen is that has kept the economy going, okay? And really what it's enabled people to do is to stay in jobs, and that's a good thing, all right? So guys, coming back to the technology side, what's your thoughts on the technology and the uptake and prop tech or whatever? Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Any thoughts, Ryan? Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah. It's funny, I was on a panel, this is actually last year, I was on a panel, and it was with the employment minister in Singapore, and I was chatting to him beforehand, and we were chatting about schooling over here in Singapore, and Singapore schools are really well known for, well, the way their approach is, which is pretty much rope learning, and they get really highly educated people who, but the frustration is they don't necessarily have the ability to take that lessons and apply it in all different things, where the Australian school system's a little bit different, the English school system a little bit different. But the interesting thing is, his problem was saying that on the one hand, everybody, they know they have to change the system. But in order to change the system, they not only have to change the curriculum, they have to get the teachers to be able to teach that curriculum. They have to get the parents to accept that, there's not going to be this drive for the best marks and having the best marks. And, it's a hard one. And as they said, it's going to be 2 generations before they're able to make that pivot. Interestingly, I think actually it probably won't be that now, because I think a lot of this technology that's coming through is actually allowing us to pivot and change a lot quicker. And that goes for everything from employment. I mean, just look at the current situation with, we've gone from everyone works in offices to now everyone works at home to everyone works a blend of office and home. And I think that's where we're going to move to, which, is going to create a massive amount of change. But I think, technology is here to stay. But the good thing about that is that is a deflationary, thing. So, when you start putting these things together, a lot of this doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a massive kick in the tail, And I think that's the important thing. It's not necessarily going to be a case that we're going into a depression, we're going into a massive recession. America, they actually led the way in 2008, where they literally just printed their way out of the recession. And as much as everyone said, no, that, it's got to come, the chickens are coming home to roost, they're coming home to roost, it hasn't actually happened, So, yeah. So, guys, if you're on the YouTube channel, you're probably best to give up now, because we're going to go into chatting lots and lots about stuff. And unfortunately, we won't be able to hear Ryan and Ritesh. Just got a technical issue. We're not going to be able to fix it, because basically, unless I can't right now. But anyway, So Simon, actually, I'll add Simon's thing. So Simon just said, when do you think the bank will start relaxing lending again? So look, banks, there's two things. I don't think bank lending is a problem right now from them not having money to lend or the fact that they don't want to lend. I think the problem is they've come from austerity with Brexit, so they've actually scaled back their operations, and all of a sudden they've got a massive, influx, and they just can't handle them. So I think right now they've tightened the criteria, so they're only getting the very best of applications. So when will that thing? I think what we'll do is things will start slowing down over Christmas. Even though I said that would start happening in October, it didn't. Maybe it'll start happening now in November with the lockdown. We'll see. But look, when do I think? I think spring next year we'll probably start seeing things open up a bit more, and we'll know where the unemployment figures are. So watch the unemployment figures, what's happening there. If they start to shoot up massively, then we're into problems. I don't think they will because of the furlough scheme, because of the job support scheme coming after that. A lot of employers haven't let go of their staff. And that's a good thing, because if you think about this, guys, if I let go of a staff member, and just because things have slowed down, what happens? I have to then rehire that staff member, or that staff member has to go and get another job. Now that whole process of an economy takes about 2 years. So what will happen is it'll shed a lot of jobs, and in fact unemployment rate will go up. But then what will happen is over the next 2 years, that unemployment rate will come back down again as the economy gets back on its feet. And I think that's the important thing. So when do I think they'll start lending again? I think they'll start lending again once, number one is once they see what's happening with unemployment, and when they actually get through this run of applications. We'll probably see that pick off. Look, make no mistake, they want to lend. I used to run a mortgage company, and so we used to do this. If we would take, say, a 10 million tranche of money, and if we're at 8 million and we had like 50 applications come in, we would immediately just change our criteria. So it was really hard because we knew we'd have to go get that, repackage it, get rid of it out, and get a new 10 million in. Otherwise we couldn't lend. So that's just natural what you do. And that's what's happening here, I think. Okay, so hopefully that sort of explains that one. So let's move on. So how do you prepare for this? So I guess, for me, what we're looking at here, how do you guys as individuals, because we can talk about all the big picture and the economics and all that sort of stuff. I think, from my perspective, okay, is we've got to look at it from this perspective. If you, in your individual circumstances, look at your debt levels and they're too high, get them down any way you can. If that means restructuring, paying back, remortgaging, because remember, rates are low now, so you can get low rates, okay? So get your debt levels down, because if it does, go into a recession, depression, and it, lingers and there's lots of unemployment, which could happen. It's becoming less and less likely for me, I think. But if it's going to happen, it's going to happen next year, I think. Things will slow down now, and next year's probably be a lot harder than this year. Because the other side of it is the stimulus from the government will be more refined now. Where it was a blanket, furlough was for anyone employed, what you might find is next year, it's for this industry, that industry, this industry, that industry, but not this industry. Or this industry gets this, maybe more than what the general get. And they'll target it better, okay? Because let's face it, they don't want to keep funding, dogs. Yeah. So basically, they've got to decide where they want to put the money in. Yeah. So debt levels, that's the first thing. The other side is income levels, and make sure you secure your income, but also, if you can, increase your income. Yeah. Now that might be hard right now, but it may mean that on a business you've got to pivot. If you're a salesperson, you've got to look at where your leads are coming in, where your sales are coming in. Spending, you might have to decrease your spending. You might have to look at alternative income, a side hustle or something. So things like that. What are your guys' thoughts about that? Yeah. 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 No. Yeah. 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 Yep. Any thoughts, Britt? Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. 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 Yep. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 I think, yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, we talk about zigzag, when others zig, you zag, or contrarian theory, depending on what you call about. But I think that's really important right now is because, there's an element of, if you don't know what you're doing and you're not educated and you're not experienced, then of course the tendency is to sit around and do nothing, you know. But what happens is, you know, if by the same token, even when it comes back, you know, and the market returns, you still sit around because you procrastinate. You know, whereas what you find is the experienced people, they're the people that are moving now and actually have been moving for probably, I did a video back in, I think it was one in March and then one in June. And in March I said, smart money's at the starting blocks. It's waiting for the moment. In June I said, smart money's working now, you know, and that's when they were getting in. Yeah. And, you know, that was during the first lockdown, you know, and that hasn't stopped. You know, some of the conversations we're having now, you know, there's some big money already getting and transactions. I mean, we're looking at land and things like that, some of these places. And it's just, you know, it's damn near impossible to get it unless you want to really, you know, keep negotiating your price up. But that is natural. And this is what happens. The people that have got experience, they're jumping in now. And then they'll start building it out. And so in another 2 years' time, that stuff, you know, will bounce back. And that's what it'll be. You know, so, but obviously if you're not experienced, you're going to be sitting around there and you'll wait for that 2 or 3 years and probably buy it up here, you know. So yeah. But anyway, talking about property. So I think tips for buying property, and you know, you mentioned a few of these, you probably jumped the gun a bit, but that's all right. You know, buy in the best areas because they rebound the quickest. Buy with the best fundamentals because they've got the best long-term prospects. And I've also put in there disruption opportunities. So things like commuter towns, tech cities, you know, work from home, you know, office blend. So, you know, your commuter places where you go, actually, it's a really good environment to live in that environment. It's close to the best schools. So Milo, this might answer your question about, you know, Milo just said he's on the YouTube channel. I don't know where he's there anymore, but anyway, I'll chuck it on. You know, I'm buying a family home, good school catchment around 1 million in Zone 5 London. Should its value hold better in terms of term versus average in 2010 because of its quality, or fare worse because it's expensive? Well, I think number one is £1 million house in Zone 4 isn't necessarily expensive, okay? Sorry, Zone 5. Depending on where it is. You know, I'm not sure what street it's in and all that sort of stuff. So is it expensive compared to a £200,000 house? Yeah, it is. But if, you know, that whole street is a mill, then actually, you know, it's probably going to fare fine. The other side is we're actually seeing that, you know, people are moving out. People are looking out into the commuter towns. So Zone 5 is not that far out these days. So I think actually, you know, Milo, you know, I think you'll fare pretty well because we're already seeing the London market start to move. You know, I did on my live stream last week, I mentioned about the fact that Zone 1 and 2, or prime central London above 10 million, there was more sales value this year than there was last year. Yeah. So, you know, despite lockdown and despite the media and all that sort of stuff. So actually, London kicks first, and central London, prime central London kicks first, then it sort of ripples out, you know, and so that's kind of what we're seeing. So what are your thoughts on areas? What are your thoughts on, you know, buying property? Yeah. 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 Haven't we? Yeah. 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 But I think one of the other points too, you know, there's one thing to model the property scenarios, but actually there's the other side too, which is modeling your individual scenarios. So if I lose my job, what job do I get back? You know, what happens if the price goes down? You know, these sort of things. If you start modeling those, you actually get a lot more certainty, which is, you know, something that, you know, Simon mentioned, you know, a lot of uncertainty at the moment. And there's always a lot of uncertainty. I call it the white noise. It's always there. You know, it's like the old TV screens, you know, without a channel, they just shh in the background. That's always there. And it doesn't matter that they can be going at 15% a year and everyone's talking about how it's going to drop. You know, it can be dropping 15% a year and everyone's talking about how it's going to go further. You know, it's like there's always that there. There's never the certainty. And the way you get the certainty is by getting educated, getting really good quality advice around you and, you know, working with professionals, you know. So, yeah. Sorry, Ryan, you were going to say something? Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Farouk, I saw you. Yeah, you can't hear. Unfortunately, you can't hear Ryan and Rit. But what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to pull the live stream off. I'll insert their bits in. But yeah, if you've got any questions, you can send that's for anything actually, guys. You can either put them in there now and we'll deal with them if they're appropriate, or otherwise webinars@gladfish.com you can do. So Farouk, I'll put that on hold. We'll come to it a little bit later. Yeah. So the question is, how long will this last? Because I think if you look back over those last 9 recessions, okay, realistically, none of them have been more than 3 years long. And what you're looking at, 2 years is the most. And I mentioned before why the 2 years, because that's the time that it takes to shed off all that employment and then rehire it back and get them to be productive again. Because it's not just about going, oh, okay, you're leaving and now we're rehiring, and because it takes 3-6 months to get people up and be productive for a business. And that then returns to the bottom line of the business. So that's what you're sort of looking at. That's the reason why, 2 years is what you sort of expect. Now, the question then becomes, is it 2 years from the start of this year, or is it 2 years from, the start of next year? And that's really something we don't know, But the one thing I will say is I think the government, they're not going to stop putting this incentive and stimulant in. And the reason they're not going to is because all of a sudden now they change tack and they go, right, no, we're going to choose austerity now. They've just raised the cash levels by this much, lent a whole heap of money out. If all of a sudden they do austerity, then they're just going to lose all that, and they've still got the debt there that they've got to pay back, which is just going to send us into a 10-year thing. It's just not going to happen. This is the sort of thing where you make the decision to do it, you see it through, okay? And I think we're seeing that now, and we've seen that now with the second lockdown, is straight away they've come, right, we're putting or we're extending the furlough scheme, the bounce back loans, all these sort of things are still there and are being supported. So that's actually a good thing, And as I said before, depression, I think it's unlikely. The response has been the total opposite of what happened in 29, with the Great Depression. That hasn't happened, and that's not that's not what we're talking about right now. So I'm not even worried about that being the case. How about you guys? Any thoughts on length of recession, or what do you think? Yeah. 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 Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. I just thought I'd jump in here. So Sean just mentioned 10 years, okay, and I'm assuming that he meant 10 years. How long is it going to be before we, how long is it going to last? The interesting thing is, and I know what he means. Do I agree with him on the 10 years? It depends on how you answer the question. Depends on what we mean. When I say 2 to 3 years, I'm talking about the recession element where things are, we're shedding jobs and we're just trying to get back to where we're rehiring those, so getting the unemployment rate back down. Sure, the sting in the tail could be 10 years. The debt that's accrued now could be 10 years before it's paid off. So, in some ways, it's not that I don't agree with you, Sean. I think actually, yes, it could be 10 years, and elements of that, and certainly if you go bankrupt, that can affect you for a long time. So on an individual basis, yeah, it can affect you. But I think the actual, the time when we're sitting there going, hold on a sec, this is a recession. We're coming out of the recession where things are bad, but they're looking better now, and that sort of thing. That I think is more of a 2 or 3 year situation. And for me, given the stimulus, I'm more thinking the 2 year than the sort of the 3 year. And I don't think the 10 year. But the sting in the tail will be that the debt's going to be around for a while. But again, that debt is very cheap. Yeah, for government debt right now is very, very cheap. And so therefore, is that going to affect us from growing? I don't think it will. Now look, I'd love to get 10 different economists on here, because you would get 20 different opinions, on this, because nobody agrees with it really. And but it is amazing, because look, I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but what I am is I'm a guy who studied economics at school and university. I play with it, I understand it, I read books about it, I keep in touch with it. But the thing is, what I find is that a lot of economists are continually predicting that there's got to be this massive correction, there's got to be this massive correction, got to be this massive correction. And I know a couple of these guys who have been predicting that for 30 years, that I've been following them, and it's never come true. They continue to get, and they're forever predicting it within the next year, within the next year, within the next year, and it just doesn't happen, So I'm not saying that it won't, And I'm not saying that we might end up in an almighty crash, and we could all be wrong, and the doomsayers could be, that case. But I'm optimistic because I think that the governments around the world, and because we've all gone in this together, and we're all doing the same thing together, I think that stimulus and the approach actually could see us come through this. But yeah, it's going to mean that debt levels are higher and all these sort of things. Do I think that it's going to end up in the Japanese lost decade? I don't think so. And I think most countries are going to try and avoid that like the plague. So yeah. So we've got a couple, I'll just deal with a couple more here. So we've got Milo's just written, any thoughts if stamp duty is likely to be extended to avoid cliff edge on house prices, which impacts consumer confidence and growth recovery? Do I think it'll be extended? I don't think it will. All right, that's just my gut feel right now. I don't think it will. I think it's a bit like with the evictions. They said there's 60,000 evictions going to happen, and it's going to be a massive thing. And the reality on the figures was actually nowhere near that. All right, and I think the same thing with this stamp duty cliff edge. I think, yes, it's taking longer to get those sales processed and that sort of thing. So yeah, a few people might miss out. But do I think, and look, it depends what happens the next 3 months. If the market continues to boom, boom, boom all through winter, then maybe we're going to have a problem where we have a cliff edge, and maybe they will do something. But I'm not so sure that that's going to really be a big thing. Will they maybe change it so they integrate it back, or graduate it back in? Possibly, but I think it depends what happens over things. If things slow down now, and the backlog is able to catch up, then I actually don't think there will be. I'm not going to see it. I'm not planning on it being extended. Yeah, and then Sean's got another one. Money's too cheap. We could have inflation, which is confused with growth. 100% agree. I think, look, we could have inflation. I think we definitely will have inflation, but I think the question is that inflation going to be so high that it's of a concern? I'm not so sure. I think, if anything, what we're going to be having is a period, and it could be a decade, okay, of lower rate of returns on various things, which means things like property, which we used to say property doubles every 7 to 10 years. It's the biggest assumption in property. Shares used to. I remember back when I was in my 20s working for an IFA, we used to basically be able to say that we could get people sort of 10 to 12% returns, and that was kind of expected, But then, of course, now we're lucky to get sort of 5 to 8%. Returns. And even now, if you look at, a lot of things, they're not even getting that. So times have changed, So yeah, look, this is not, and I think, if we sort of, bring it to the summary, look, do I think there's going to be an almighty crash? I don't. Okay. Well, have you guys got any thoughts on that? What are your thoughts? Almighty crash or? Well, I think we're already in a recession. There's no doubt about that. But yeah. 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 Yeah, yeah. I think, it's an interesting situation right now, and I think the real thing takeaway from this that I'm going to say with this is, you need to look at your own individual circumstances, and you need to work out what your plan from here is, what your strategy from here is, and the rules that apply to that strategy, and work all that out, and then still make money. Because whether the market's slow and whether we have low growth, whether we have high inflation, whatever comes, even if the market drops, you need to have a plan for that. And I think if you're sitting there and you're not really sure, and you're watching lots of webinars and you're going to lots of places, and they're showing you all the opportunities, get this stuff in place first. because that for me is the absolute key that you have to get. You know, if you're not going to get that plan in place that accounts for a lot of these uncertainties and a lot of this white noise, then really you're going to be here in 5-10 years, and it doesn't matter what's happened in the next 5 or 10 years because you didn't take any action. You've got to come up with a plan, you know, and it may be a plan A and plan B. If it does this, then do this. If it does this, then do this. You know, and that may be the plan, where you sort of, you know, you move this direction, but if it starts to go this direction, then you flip over to this. That's fine. And you know, if you're not sure of that, give the team a call. You know, I mean, this is what we do all day, every day, is we sit down and we work through these things, you know, and we get that plan in place before we start going, you know, pitch. Unfortunately, our industry is so full of people that just pitch. And have I got a deal for you? And if you don't take it today, somebody else is going to get it, and prices are going up, you know, and half of it's BS, you know, and the other half is hype, you know. What are your thoughts on, you know, summary? What's the actions from here? What do you think these guys should do? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Or find something else. I mean, for me, sit tight and wait is not really an option these days, you know, because you can lose a year or two. You find a strategy that works for you, and it may be that it's an interim strategy. I mean, I've got guys that work for us, and they cannot afford to buy a house yet because, number one, they haven't got the fiscal discipline to be able to save the money. They're just doing that, so they've just got into that. And number two is they haven't got their income high enough, you know, to get a property that they want. So we're working with them on that, with the plan that once they've got that sorted, then they can get into a house. And you know, interestingly, we've had more staff buy houses this year than we have probably in the last 2 or 3 years, you know, because, you know, a few of those things have come to fruition. And, you know, things like furlough actually worked out well because not furlough, lockdown worked out really well because all of a sudden now all that money they spent on Friday and Saturday nights going out, all of a sudden bought them a house, you know. So, you know, by all means, you know, don't rush into things, but by the same token, don't sit around on your ass and think that you've got time because, you know, that clock is speeding up, you know, whether you like it or not. So, yeah. Any final points, guys? Yeah. Yeah. Nah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. 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 Yep. No. Yeah. No. No. Unfortunately, most people will sell it to you like that. It's get rich quick, and you got to get rich now. You got to get in now. You know, but it's not that case. As we say, the best deal in property comes along every day. You know. So one more. I've got another question. So do you also look into commercial property opportunities? We don't do commercial property as such. You know, pub industry, that sort of thing. You mentioned pub industry depressed now. It could recover with vaccine news. It's not really what we do. You know, we're resi. You know, we're a resi company. In saying that, that's not to say that, you know, we don't know a lot about the commercial. My concern with the commercial property right now is depending on what industry that's in. Okay, pub industry is suffering a lot. Will it recover? I guess, again, it depends where the pub is. You know, I think, you know, if you're in London pub, then you're probably going to struggle for a little bit, you know, because London really has, you know, have their things. But I think, you know, there is lots of opportunity out there, you know, whether it be resi, whether it be commercial, whatever it is. You know, Sean's just asked, what's your prediction for interest rates? I think interest rates are going to stay quite low. And one of the things I do, guys, if you ever want to check where I think interest rates are going over the next 2 or 5 years, or even 10 years, have a look at the fixed rates. Okay, go to any mortgage company, you know, Halifax, and look at their 2-year, their 5-year, and their 10-year fixed rate, and see where they think interest rates are going. And obviously if they're 2 years here and the 5 years here and the 10 years here, then it probably means that interest rates are going to, you know, stay around about that, go up a little bit and then shoot up, you know, 10 years time. You know, but actually if you have a look now, what most of them do is they're staying quite low. They're increasing a little bit, increasing a little bit. So 2 years is here, 5 years is here, and 10 years here, you know. So actually now you could lock in an interest rate relatively low for 10 years and forget about it, which, interesting, a lot of countries actually do that. They have long-term fixed rates. The US does it, you know, where you can lock in a rate for, you know, 10, 25 years if you want, you know. So, yeah, but guys, that's all I've got. If you've got any other questions, push them through. We haven't had a lot of questions from the webinar, guys. Are you guys happy? But yeah, so Farouk just come back. Due to remortgage, should I wait for negative interest rates or fix now? 1.74 being offered by NatWest. Yeah, pretty good, eh? What I would say is this. I don't think, even if they go, if you read your mortgage docs, even if they go negative, they're not going to, it's called, they're collared, okay? So they call it collar and cuff, basically, which means that it's not going to go lower than a certain percent. Doesn't matter if the bank base rate goes below that, they will still keep it there, all right? So forget it, for me, forget about negative interest rates. From us as borrowers, I don't think we will benefit from them. The banks will benefit from them, and the people who will be most disadvantaged are people who have cash in the bank, because all of a sudden, it's going to cost them to keep the money in the bank, all right? And that's what most people don't realize. But as a mortgage holder, I don't think we're going to go below the base rate, yeah? Interestingly, I've tried to find some of my mortgage documents to see if they were collared, because I've got mortgages that I took out in 2004, you know, ranging that I haven't actually remortgaged. So some of those are like 0.15 above base, which, you know, is just extraordinary now, you know, 0.5 above base and these sort of things. But I don't think they're, even with negative interest rates, I don't think they're going to pay me to keep the mortgage. Okay, that's not the case. It's more a case of, you know, what it's going to cost the savers to keep their money in the bank. All right. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. Rich, just for the YouTube guys, Rich just said that that it won't force the banks, but it'll encourage them to lend that money out. Yeah, and that 100%, you know, 100% agree with. So look, you know, for me, my attitude is actually things are going as good as they can be. You know, we've got the coronavirus, which to be fair, you know, I mean, it was bound to happen. It's bound to happen again. But the reality is, just hopefully not for another 100 years, you know, or more. But the reality is that they have responded, from my perspective, in a really good way. Yes, they've taken a lot of debt. Yes, they could have done things better. They could have communicated better. But actually, given the, you know, the scale of the emergency, you know, actually things have been pretty damn good, you know. Now, that's not discounting that if you've lost your job, if you're unable to pay your rent, if you're unable to pay your mortgage, if, you know, it's a horrid thing, you know. But, you know, as a broad-based policy, you know, the government's done bloody well, you know. And as much as, you know, Boris is a bit of a buffoon, you know, and sometimes I wonder whether he is intelligent or whether he's just bloody damn lucky, and, you know, actually they've pulled it out of the bag. I think it could have been a lot worse, and thank goodness they didn't go, right guys, we're not going to take on debt, we're just going to go austerity, and we, you know, because we don't want to borrow money we don't have. No, I think the fact that rates are so low, they can borrow. You know, the banks were prepared for this, by the way. The banks, and, you know, if you look back about 2 years ago when I started predicting this happening, not coronavirus, the recession, you know, I was talking about how the banks were cashed up to the max, you know, ready for this. And that was part of what they did, you know, that they makes. And that's why bank lending has been so hard for so long, because they've had to keep that bank in. But yeah. All right, guys. I think that's it. There's no other questions, is there? Oh, sorry, wait there. No, I don't think so. Yeah, okay. All right, guys. So next week. So let's talk about next week. So next week we've got the impossible property dream, 100 properties or just 4 to freedom. Well, we've got Dan back after his midterm, what is it? Yeah, not what do they call it? Not midterm. I've got American, half term. I've got my bloody American head on. No, look, so we're going to talk about why we think and why I think 4 properties is enough to create freedom and certainly set you on the path. You don't need to be thinking about 100 and I think that's really good. You know, I'm quite excited about that one, because we'll look at financially how that works and how it comes together, even in today's money. Okay. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. And yeah, so out in YouTube land, I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. We're getting there slowly, but slowly we're working on the, you know, things. But for the guys on the webinar, thank you very much for joining us. Any questions you've got, and this goes for anyone, if you've got questions, webinars@gladfish.com, and I'm happy to record videos or answer them live on my live stream every Wednesday, 12:30 on my YouTube channel or on my Facebook channels. I come to you live and we cover the news from a property investor's perspective. Or if you're on the YouTube or Facebook and you're watching this and you're not signed up, you can sign up. Just go to gladfish.com/webinars and go to the autumn webinar series. When, you know, number 4 next week, so we've got 3 more to come. 4 more to come now. This is number 3. So yeah, and we'll look forward to having you on. And guys, we'll see you next week. So yeah, thanks Rit, and thanks Ryan, and thank you all. Excellent. Cheers, guys. And be sure to subscribe to my channel if you're on YouTube, you know, and actually click the like button if you can too, even if, yeah, the audio's been a bit of a mongrel. But anyway, guys, thanks very much. We'll chat later. See you later. Bye.